Welcome to the next session for Computers in Libraries. I'll be the moderator for this session. My name is Mary D. Ojala, and I am the editor of Online Searcher magazine, which I hope you all read. Just one housekeeping note for you, just a reminder that the evening session will take place in the Regency Ballroom at 7:30 tonight, so that should be fun and exciting. Our presentation this afternoon is all about ILS migrations, and we have 4 speakers on the topic. John DeLooper, who is Web Services and Online Learning Librarian for Lehman College, but used to be at Hudson County Community College. And this will be the theme of the introductions of the speakers here. So we also have Mei Ji, who is Technical Services Librarian for Hudson County Community College, Devlyn Courtier, who is the Library Technology Associate at Hudson County Community College, and Lotta Sanchez, also Library Technology Associate at Hudson County Community College. So in case you're wondering where they're from, you now know that. So I think John will start us off. Is that right? Okay, John, please.
All right. Thank you. How's my volume? Good? Okay. So yes, indeed, we are going to be talking about ILS migrations, and you've just heard who is up here. And I think when we start to talk about ILS migrations, we have kind of a unifying theme going through this. To us, we found that an ILS migration, because the ILS is a software that's involved with so much of your day-to-day library operations, acquisitions, cataloging, circulation, that when you're thinking about deciding whether you're going to want to switch one, it's a very hard decision. And it's also going to be a hard process. But we have good news for you. It is hard, but it's doable. And you got this. So the reason I can confidently say that is because all of us up here went through a migration ourselves from 2015 to 2017, and along the way we learned a couple of lessons which we're going to share with you today. So those lessons are: know your needs and whether migration is right for you, know your people and your vendors and what they can and can't do, make a plan but be ready for change, data is key, and identify legacy processes and opportunities to improve. So before I go too far down the library jargon, you know, librarians were very into our jargon, and we are always dropping words and phrases. I'm going to start by making sure I define the jargon I'm going to use. So ILS migrations, or ILS is Integrated Library System. It's a software that does do those functions like circulation, cataloging, serials, acquisitions. ILS migration, the process of switching from one ILS to another. You may hear, if you're already in this process, that a lot of vendors are saying, you know, we don't do ILSs anymore. Now we have LSPs. To us up here, there is some distinctions, but it's a distinction without a difference, because all the major LSPs do those same core library functions, but they often add some additional features on top, like discovery layers or link resolvers. So, and then finally, when you are looking, you will see some different vendors who will talk about whether their product is open source, whether it's proprietary. Librarians were big into software, and you know that libraries often use open source software like Firefox, Linux, OpenOffice, LibreOffice. These are products where the software is made, but you can look at the source code. If you have the technical know-how, you can modify it yourself. Open source software is very popular. It's been around a long time. Many ILSs are open source. You'll also see other ILSs that are proprietary. With the proprietary ones, it's kind of like if you're thinking software, you think like Microsoft Word, Windows. These kind of software is proprietary. The manufacturer makes it. They have their own processes, their own. You can't modify the source code. It kind of keep it like a secret formula, like Coca-Cola. Good news on that front, many of the proprietary ones do have APIs, so again, if you have somebody who's pretty technical, they might be able to do some modifications, do some interactive, but they are two different fundamental software types. And to get us furthermore on the same page, when we were looking at this project, we went back and we started looking at the history of ILSs, where they came from. And in our research, we found that libraries have always been interested in trying to take processes to improve them, make them better for their patrons and their staff. And you can go back to the turn of the century and you can see things like when the Library of Congress started selling catalog cards. You can look at the work of like Frederick Winslow Taylor and all the studies that people did in libraries about how to improve efficiency in different departments. And ILSs kind of came out of this process when software started to become bigger. So you see in the literature in the 1960s, computers start to become available from companies like IBM, Remington Rand. They take these, they have these huge room-sized computers, and they have punch card systems, and they start doing punch cards to track some of the library functions, like seeing who's borrowed items, when they're due, also to keep track of orders. Then in the 70s, you see that the field further evolves. Computers continue to evolve, and along with this, instead of these punch cards and getting teletype printouts, people start to be using keyboards and screens. Other technologies that we no longer use, like light pens, also become very popular. And with these technologies in the 70s, there's a few other interesting developments, like the development of the database. So now you no longer had to have your software be tracking everything static. You can now kind of link those key library functions. You could see who had borrowed a book, and it would reflect it in a catalog display. So this kind of process of, as the computer evolved, so have these ILSs. In the 80s, we saw the graphical user interface emerge, and the term started to switch to, from library automation, we started to hear about integrated library systems, reflecting that linkage, and we, as the 90s and 2000s have come, the products have gotten more sophisticated. They've added other things. Some of them have mobile interfaces, which is all very interesting, and it just shows how much these processes have evolved. So when we were looking at this, we also were wondering, how often are people actually switching? Because it's a huge project, but it's been something that people have been doing for over 50 years now. So we looked into it, and we went and we read the data on Marshall Breen's library technology reports, and based on our math, we counted about an average of 800 libraries a year switching ILSs. So that's something that people are doing not only frequently, but it's our feeling that if you've been through one, if you haven't been through one, you're probably likely going to be through one, and you're probably going to go through more than one in your career. I can speak for the people on the podium here that May and I have both been through multiple ILS migrations at different institutions, so it's something that if you haven't had it yet, know that that is something to expect, and it's a normal part of the library operations process.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, lesson 1, know your needs and whether migration is right for you. So you have to consider all these factors, like do you want or need to migrate? It really depends on your library needs. You may have to, you may not. It depends, what your library is using currently, the current trends in your library, the growing environment, the growing field in your library. So sometimes you may not have to. Maybe you have a good relationship with your ILS. Like you have a good relationship with your vendor. They give you good service. It's all good. Everyone knows how it is. It works for your library. Stay with it. It's okay. So, but if you are considering migrating, start thinking. Start researching. Think about it first. Consider what's going on with your own library. See what can be changed, what cannot be changed. Start researching, start considering, start looking around to all different vendors. And for the cost benefit, make sure as you start researching, as you start thinking about what to, if you are considering migrating, ask yourself the cost questions, the benefits questions, like, does this vendor cost more for less, cost more for more, or does it cost less for less, or cost less for more, or they're about the same level? Look at the data migration fees, because going from one server to another is going to take time, it's going to take money, And of course, the setup fees when you're like moving from one ILS to another is going to have a lot of extra costs. It's kind of like buying a new phone. It's like aside from paying for the phone, you have the setups, you have maybe probably adding another line, the cases, the accessories, kind of like that. No, also there are intangible costs. Like when you talk to your staff that you're considering migrating from one ILS to another, they're gonna ask you why is this happening. They might object. Some people might be cool with it. Some people might not. Be sure to cooperate with them, negotiate with them, communicate with them, explain why this is happening, explain why maybe we shouldn't. It may not happen at all if there's like no support, or it will happen like eventually when you're deciding that maybe this is the right move at this time, at this environment that is happening in our library. Look at the futures. Look what this ILS have compared to your old one. For example, in Hudson County Community College, when we were considering migrating, we wanted to have a reserves module that our old ILS didn't. So we started looking at vendors, see if they have something for our library reserves. You may not, of course, you're not going to be using like all modules. So see what your library needs. See if this future is good. Like, okay, this is where we're going. Okay, this is what's happening. This is just as important as that future. Okay, let's go for it. And different ILSs always have like different things. So if one doesn't have it and then one does, then okay, consider that. It definitely depends on like what your library has. And if your old ILS, and you may have to force to migrate too, if your old ILS has a future that is not supported anymore, or it supports it but it costs extra, then you may have to start thinking of researching again. In our case, your contract may expire, or maybe or you may not want to renew again. Then that's when you start your researching. And support, make sure you have the staff backup. Make sure your staff is behind this. Make sure they understand why this is happening. Make sure you're, in the case of a library in a college institution like us, make sure your institutional leaders know that this is happening, that they know that this is a good thing for the library, it's a good thing for the students, it's a good thing for the college community. Make sure you have the budget, the time to do this, that there's enough in the budget, there's enough time, that there's a time that you can do all this without at least messing up your circulation data, your checking ins and checking outs. And weigh all the futures, the pros and cons. And if there's more pros and cons, if there's more cons than pros, it's all about research. It's all about what you need at certain different times and with certain different patrons. And as libraries grow, as libraries emerge, there's always going to be something new, and that's when you start your research. And if you have done your research, have seen what it can do what a new ILS can do for your library, then all good to go.
All right, lesson 2, know your people and your vendors. We broke it down into 2 sections, your resources and the vendor resources. So under your resources, your responsible parties, this is usually your project managers, any unit heads that you're in charge of it, and it goes down to your librarians, any support staff you have, techs, whatever it may be. And then going further down into that, we separated down a little bit more. We have staff roles and expertise. You want to make sure that the people who are going to see this change, you want to know what their skill set is, what they're at, what they're using currently right now, what else is going to be used, and take into consideration when you're looking at the new ILS that you want to move to. Do they need more information? Is this something that everyone's already doing? Is this very similar? Is there just superficial changes that may not actually be different, but it may look differently? That's all they need to know. Ways of communicating the change. This includes all staff, the patrons that are using it. If there's a side in the OPAC or whatever you're using at the moment that has it, you want to make sure that they also are aware. That way, if you have a familiar patron coming in, they don't see something different and start to panic thinking maybe there's a virus or something's wrong with the site or whatever it may be. And then on the staff side, you want to make sure that no one's worried that something's wrong with the system that they're using every day. So it's just a quick, things are going to be different, but don't worry. This is to be expected. How much time can you devote to this project? This goes into training. If it's vastly different, if it's doing more things than the current ILS you have are, if it's doing the same things and they just look very different, you want to make sure that everyone's aware where these new things are and are aware how to use them. It also goes into, is there going to be more needed to be done? Is there new features that people need to know? Who are the people who need to know this? Do they already know how to do this? And where are these features? What do your patrons want and expect? If someone likes something, if a patron likes something you're doing, you don't want to get rid of it. You want to make it, if anything, you want to make it better, more accessible. You want to make it seen, but you don't want to get rid of it. You want to make it worse. And if there's, on the other hand of it, if there's things that they dislike or things that staff also have noted, this doesn't work too well. We want to make sure that when you get into the new ILS, it's been looked at, it's been addressed, and you make it a little smoother going into existing and desired workflows. It goes smooth and streamlined the way you want everything to go. That way, on both the patron side and the staff side, everyone's as comfortable as it can be for what's going on. Of course, there's going to be some people who they don't like the change or it's different for them, but you want to make it as that's the least possible. On to the other side, the vendor side. Do you need a vendor? Larger institutions and libraries might not. If you have an open source system and you have the staff with the levels of expertise that you need, you might be able to do it yourself. You might be able to see what you need, bring it in, change it, modify it, bring it to your ideal respect. Smaller institutions and libraries they typically rely on vendors, and that goes into the support as well. Complexity of the product. Taking back to the level of time that you can dedicate to the project, the more complex and different it is than what you have right now, the more time you have to dedicate to training, the more time you have to put into all this. It all depends on how complex it becomes. If it's something that's just quick changes, that less the problems there, but if it does a lot more features and a lot of different aspects to this, it becomes a little more complex, more time. You never want to sacrifice your output to your patrons and services, but you want to try and balance it. Open source versus proprietary software. If you have access to everything and you can modify yourself open source wise, that's great if you know what you're doing on that, if you have support for that, that's great, but it also relies on if something has to be changed, that if you don't have their support in the vendor or if it has to be a way to contact them, that's a factor to take into, as opposed to proprietary software where you don't have that kind of power over the system, but you do get to, sorry about that, you do get to put in a way to contact them and something gets changed and hopefully quicker over longer, but it does get what you want done. Reliability of the product. This extends from just looking it up on the main site to the ILS, to talking to other people, maybe some of you are doing that these few days here, to just basic reviews of stuff from other libraries or seeing it maybe in other institutions or libraries. You also want to make sure that the support that you get from these, depending on what you're seeing on these and the feedback you've gotten from sites and other people, you want to make sure that the support you have connects to when you're working and when you're open, going into how support is provided. Is it a ticket system? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it open Monday through Friday only, not on weekends? Is your institution or your library open Monday all the week, 7 days a week? If there's a problem on a weekend and they're only Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, what happens if something happens on a Saturday? Is there someone to contact for this? You want to make sure that that's all somewhere read before moving, that way you're ready for any something to come up. You don't want to be left in the dark if a Saturday staff member knew has a problem. You also want to look at the surface level agreement. If it's a problem in the future, it might be somewhere written, and it might entail to sometimes a change of the contract or even sometimes the money back, depending on how many times it goes down. Differentiating features and whether you need them. My colleague Lotta covered some of this. Sometimes it has these large bundles of things that they look really nice, but you're not going to use them and you don't need them. So you want to see what is in there that you do need and what you do want. And sometimes there's a smaller tier that's a little cheaper or better suited to you. Even if it's one thing that's kind of nice to have isn't there, but everything you need and more things that are working better for you are in it. It might be the better way to go. This also depends on budgetary constraints and other things for your institution or library. Local laws, this one can connect to bidding, to cost, to even features, especially those considering privacy and open resource requirements. You want to open source requirements. You want to make sure that everything is okay in the local laws in your municipality. For example, at HCCC, we need a minimum of 3 bids before we could select one and move forth to see if that's the one we want to choose and go on with it. But we need a minimum before anything of 3.
All right. Lesson 3. Make a plan, but be ready for change. So we've talked a lot in general about our general thoughts, our general ways we selected things, but you probably want to hear our story. So our story, HCCC, we actually started considering whether we wanted to migrate shortly after we had signed a contract with another vendor. And what happened when we had that, we had a dean at the time who was very much into planning and foresight. And what she did was she said, on the very day after we had signed the old contract, she took the Post-it note that's on the screen and stuck it on my desk and said, you need to know this is one of our most important things, and you need to decide if this is something we want to continue with or not. We need to start evaluating now. So what we did when that happened was that provided an opportunity for me to ask my colleagues to start talking around and seeing what was working and what wasn't working, and whether we wanted to stay with them or whether we wanted to consider what alternatives were out there. So once started hearing feedback that people were interested in seeing what other alternatives were available, what we did was we assembled a team, which consisted of myself, who my position at the time was Director of Library Technology. Then we had May, who was Head of Technical Services, Sarah Bryant, who was our Head of Access Services, as well as one of our technology associates named Jonathan Cintron. So we took this team, we felt that we could confidently address a lot of the core areas of our library service, and that we could then see which things people liked, which things they didn't want, which ones we wanted to follow up and see if could be changed, and then take it from there. So we started having meetings, and then what we did was we actually set up a timetable where we planned to look at alternatives, to evaluate, decide whether we were going to purchase, go through all that administrative stuff that Devlyn mentioned about soliciting bids and doing all that kind of thing. And then we put together this timeline, and we worked our way through it. So we had a rollout that actually took from start to finish about 2 years. Now, speaking of change along the way, one of the most important things for us during this rollout was that we had a lot of padding so that we could have so we could be ready for unexpected issues that came up. So there was no shortage of things that came up during the process. So everything from working with our finance office, who had questions about whether we were working with things that were considered in New Jersey, whether they had all the paperwork for that. We also had things like we had a change in library leadership, where we got a new dean who wanted to review the whole process and decide where we were before we take any further action. Even some personal stuff, like my son was born shortly, a few weeks before our original migration date, and I was taking some time off for family leave. And then with that, our dean had some concern that he's like, look, you're not going to be around if we go through this migration. What if there's issues? So we were able to, even with that, work with the vendor because we had so much time that we had planned for this migration process. We were able to work with them to have a later start date. And we also had a time period where we were using both ILSs at the same time so that our staff could become used to it. That will be talked about a little bit more later on. So.
Hi, lesson 4. Data is the key. So I'm going to share with you our experience of data migration from legacy ILS to Koha. I'm focusing on bibliographic records and item records. Preparation, testing on test server. Koha is an open source, so we decided to try it ourselves. Actually, we also tried other two open resources, ILS 2. They are evergreen and open biblio. Since Koha is the one we selected, I am going to focus on Koha here. So what we did, we set up a test server. We defined codes for libraries, authorized values, and item types for item level information. We imported pre-selected data from legacy ILS to the test server. Using this test data, we tested functionalities of several Koha modules, such as can logging, serial, circulation, and course reserve. We also examined features of Koha OPAC and its display. What we learned from this, we were happy to learn Koha had all the modules and functions to replace our current ILS. Koha OPAC display was clear and informative. Some additional features were worth our consideration. Based on this experiment, we concluded data migration and maintenance was more complicated and challenging than we expected. So an experienced vendor was needed to facilitate this process. Migration of bibliographic records and item records. Data cleanup. Data cleanup is time-consuming, should plan ahead and plan well. Reason for data cleanup, first of all, is the first important step to guarantee a smooth migration. Secondly, we would like to have a fresh start with daily operations in Koha, so we want to clean up as much as we could. And it's also a must for post-migration work, such as authority processing. What we did with cleanup, we planned and completed long before migration. Cleanup, we tried our best to clean up all unwanted bib records and item records, such as records for withdrawn, bibliographic titles, and item records. Changing data, we also did changes on the bibliographic and item records. For example, we reclassified e-resources from generic call number, ebook, and streaming video to LC call number. Migration of bib records, MARC framework. For migration and can logging in Koha, one must know Koha MARC framework. It is like a template for creating new bibliographic records, and also it decides how bibliographic and item level information will be loaded into Koha database during migration. MARC 21 framework was used for the implementation. Our vendor prepared a MARC framework for migration, and it's our responsibility to make sure that every field and subfield were defined in the MARC framework. And we checked and found something missing, such as 264 RDA tank and its related subfields. So we added this field. We also added subfield 0 for 100, 600, 700. Subfield 0 is for authority record control number, and standard number is for linked data purposes. Migration of item records overview. Migration of item records is a little bit more complicated than bib records. In data migration, no physical item records are imported in the process. Instead, item records are generated based on item level information in Koha 952 field when loading of bib records. The subfield codes for item level information in Koha 952 are coded differently from those in legacy ILS 999 field. For example, subfield code for library in Koha is A, in legacy ILS is M. Subfield code for call number in Koha is O, in legacy ILS is A. So the important issue in data migration is to correctly transfer item level information in 999 field of legacy ILS to Koha 952. So what we did, vendor generated report with detailed information related to subfield codes of item records based on the data we sent to them. We worked with vendor on identifying each of the subfield codes, deciding which subfield code to use and keep, mapping the subfield codes of the two ILS. Note, we needed to map the subfield codes which were essential for circulation, but we found some codes were no longer necessary in the new system. In these cases, the non-essential subfield codes were ignored. A migration of item records continue. Before loading bibliographic item records in Koha, codes must be defined, created in Koha administration module, such as for library, location, collection, item types, etc. Instead of using the original codes from the legacy ILS, we simplified the codes. For example, book, we just use BKS, ebook, EBK, so make it simple for catalogers. Vendor converted old codes to new codes when mapping the data. Pre-data migration, verification on test server. When everything was ready, vendor migrated data to the migration test server. Both vendor and the library staff participated in testing and checking of system configuration functions, open display, bib records, item records, etc. The importance of checking and testing is that we found mistakes, both from us and from vendor. We also got new ideas of how to rearrange certain data. We also learned the lesson. We forgot to check diacritics of bib records and had to do extra work after the server went live. Post-data migration inventory. After we've done with migration, the production server went live, we did an inventory. The reason for this is to make sure everything was migrated and migrated properly. When we did this 2 weeks after production server went live, the equipment and the tools and the report to be used are simple. Laptop, scanner, Microsoft Notepad, Koha inventory tool, and Koha inventory report. Every library staff participated in this project. Result, we further cleaned up for unwanted records and correction of records. Post-data migration authority processing. After we did the inventory, we are ready for authority processing. So we subscribed the following services from our authority processing vendor: authority control, bibliographic processing, RDA conversion, linked data. Currently, those are inactive, just retaining our records. Also, ongoing maintenance of authority records. Vendor helped with us extracting the data from Koha server, loaded the authority records and the updated bib records back to migration server for testing, and then reloading them to production server. Thus, the whole process complete. Summary for this: by experimenting on testing server by ourselves, we got to learn Koha better. We established an efficient communication channel with vendor. With the vendor support, we saved time and guaranteed a smooth migration. We felt more confident with new Koha system and got all the support whenever an issue came up. Next.
Okay, so lesson 5, identify legacy processes and opportunities to improve. So public services / circulation. In the old ILS that we had a lot of public services problems, such as the staff were not checking things out properly. Like they would think, oh, scan the ID card or the item, they hear a beep, they think it went through, but not really. So And what the other common problem was, we had one common login where staff were overriding things without having the privilege to do so. And sometimes this would result in like a lot of miscommunication, a lot of items lost, a lot of items not returned, like items missing, and even though they were there. So we wanted to alleviate these issues with the new ILS Koha. So for that, we had some training. So the Koha reps came by, they trained the staff, they trained some of the staff on what Koha is, how to use it, this, and that. In turn, the staff trained other staff members in different sessions and in the library. So we had different sessions where the previous library tech associate trained us and librarians that this is how we do this, and this is how the Koha system is, this is how we circulate, this is how we search the catalog, how we do this and that. And as for me, at that time when we were after the migration process, I was tasked to create like a LibGuide reference for Koha. So I checked out to see how Koha worked, how to do the checkouts, the check-ins, the searching, adding patrons, adding this, and that. I did the screenshots, and I uploaded onto LibGuide as a backup reference in case as it went live, we were like confused on how to do things. And at the same time, since I was on the circ desk most of the time, I would also train the staff one-on-one on the spot while we were doing a circulation. I would get a lot of, hey, Lotta, can you help me with this? How do you do this? How do you do that? So I'd be like, okay, so as the patient was in front of us, okay, so this is how we do it. Okay, so just scan the card. Okay, add the student ID. Here's the name. Done. Save. Okay, we're good. So that was fun. It was fun to learn the brand new ILS after getting somewhat used to the previous one. And during testing, we had the old ILS and Koha side by side. So it's one thing to test and another to do live. So while we had both of them side by side, we would actually do our check-ins and checkouts like on both at the same time. So when the patron handed us their ID and the item, we would go beep on one and beep on Koha. Do the same thing over and over again, so that we would familiarize ourselves with Koha. And since Koha is cloud-based, of course there will be some unexpected issues. Like it's cloud-based, its internet network goes down, it happens. So when it did go down, we developed ourselves a paper log so that when a check-in came in, we would just like write it down. This person did this, and this is the ID card. That's the item. And once the network came back up again, we would put in the check-ins manually. And there are times that people forgot that Koha went live. The old software, the icon was still there. It still kind of worked, and people will be by force, by habit, they would click on it. It'll start, and then they realize, why is it not working? Oh, no, wait, we forgot Koha went live. So, and people forgetting how to use Koha. It is hard. It is hard to like adjust to change. When you're used to one and you have to get used to another, it's like, gotta wean yourself off the old one and gotta try the new one. Okay, so now we have to familiarize ourselves with this one. And for flexibility, of course, with something new, you have to expect mistakes. As we're learning, as the patrons are wondering what's happening because we're like getting used to something, there will be mistakes, of course. I mean, it happens. It's all right, it's normal. Let it happen. That's how we learn. It took a while for us. It took about a month for us. For some maybe a little longer, for us to familiarize ourselves with Koha. We learned everything as much as we could, the basics, the check-ins, the checkout, search catalog, add patrons, did this and that. And mistakes still happen. We learn, we move on, and we got used to it.
All right, so we have a branch campus at HGCC. The main campus is in Jersey City, and we have a satellite campus a couple miles away in Union City. There's always differences in collection branch locations. Libraries, you have different patrons coming in, and while a lot of it's going to be similar, there's going to be different tastes, certain different things that happen in different locations. We're no exception. At the main location, we have a designated lab with computers that we did a lot of the trainings on, a lot of the other things needed in it. At the branch campus, we do not have that. We had to actually look for an available lab and available time. So while at the main location it was, when is everyone around for us to do trainings? At the branch campus it was, okay, these are the days this room is available. We kind of need to be here for this. So it was scheduling times to make sure everything fell into place. However, the branch campus is smaller. And with that, there's some training differences. The branch campus, being smaller, was used to more one-on-one and personalized trainings, and some of the ones I did were more so one-on-one. That being said, when it came out to live, when the ILS went out live, it was a lot less questions had to be that were asked. A lot of people were familiar with it. Rather than having an overall, if there's a question at the end kind of thing, it was asked right at the time of the training, and everyone was more comfortable in the end of it. The impact of the new procedures on staff and workflows, you have to make sure that everything is still not being sabotaged to the patrons while you're working and everything. And at the same time, because it's smaller, it was one of those, we were able to do the one-on-ones a lot more often, and it worked out better for us.
All right, so just a few more things that we couldn't really fit in everywhere else, but we thought might be useful to those of you who are considering or going through your own ILS migration. First, May mentioned how we tested out some open source ones with test servers in the beginning that we did ourselves, and then when we chose a vendor, they gave us a test server, and we worked with them to test out configuration. We liked that feature so much that we actually asked to extend that, and they added that to our package. And that was something that has continued to prove useful, because anytime we want to make a change, we decide there's a new say we want to change the borrowing period, or we want to test things like a different way of cataloging, Z3950. We want to test anything. You can do the test server, you can try it out, and it doesn't have to affect the patrons or the people who are working with it in technical services at the moment. So that's a great option, and many vendors do have this as an option, and I would highly recommend considering that. Next, the change continues. So we went through this process. It took about 2 years, and switching from one to another is a huge process that it feels like by the end you'd be tired of change. Actually, once you've gone through a migration, you start to learn the new system more and more as you work with it day by day, and you start to find new possibilities. You're able to try things that you might not have tried before because you're still new into a system and you're learning new options. So yeah, change continues, and definitely the migration's a good time to experiment and even continue changing things after you go live. Finally, statistics. May talked about all the data standards, which are standards, which made it a lot easier to get that data migrated. But when you start talking about different systems, you see that for patron data and circulations, they all track it differently, and it's sometimes harder to migrate that data. For us, we weren't able to migrate all of the circulation data. We got a lot, but not all of it. For that reason, what we did toward the end of our contract with the old vendor was we ran the reports that we did most frequently. We printed out paper copies, as well as we saved some electronic PDFs of them as well, and we kept them so that as questions came up, if we ever needed to refer back to that we would have as much of the old legacy data as possible. So with that, that's about all of our stuff. Our slides are live. You can read some more resources, and you can also ask us questions.
We have 1 minute for questions.
Any suggestions for staff buy-in and support when they're leery of changing to a new ILS? Especially when they see it's going to impact their workflow, they specifically going from a private lots of bells and whistles to an open source one where they feel it's going to impact workflow.
Okay, so the question was about how to get staff buy-in when you're switching from one ILS to another. People are hesitant to change and things like that. One thing that we found, and everyone else might have some additional info on this, was that if you could, when you explain to people the process, you laid out the timeline, and then you also gave them a chance to tell you their concerns. So there would be people who there were definitely some change averse people who go, oh, this will never work. And there's a phrase that we found works pretty good, which is, if I could address that, would you be okay with it then? And most people will say yes to that. So they'll say, yeah, and then they'll explain the concern, and hopefully you have a reason for why things are gonna be what they are or what their question is. And you can answer it, and then for most people, that satisfies them. Now, that will happen more than once. Definitely a lot of people will have a lot of different concerns, but if you can lay it out and you can address them that way, we found, especially with the one-on-one context, that's why both Devlyn and Lotta mentioned how much one-on-one training they did with people, even after we had vendor training, helped get people a lot more familiar and comfortable with the system as we both approached our go-live date and then when we were live. So does anyone else have any other stuff on that?
Honestly, like when he told me that we were switching from the old ILS to Koha, I was pretty nonchalant about it. I was like, okay, that's cool. Okay, let's test it out. I'm like, okay, it's not a software, it's open source, it's this, and that. You can have multiple logins and have different privileges depending on your staff level. And I just thought it was something new to do it. So I was just pretty much okay about it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and let's have a round of applause for our 4 speakers here.